What would you do if you found 18-inch footprints leading to your tent? That question haunted me for weeks after our family camping trip to the Pacific Northwest. I'm David Miller, and I'm about to share the most terrifying experience of my entire life. An experience that transformed what should have been a peaceful family vacation into something that still makes my hands shake when I remember it. We were just an ordinary family looking for adventure. My wife Jennifer, our teenage daughter Emma, and our 12-year-old son Tyler. We'd been planning this trip for months, saving up vacation days, researching the perfect spots in Olympic National Forest. Jenny had spreadsheets, color-coded spreadsheets with hiking trails ranked by difficulty, campsite reviews, and weather patterns for the past 5 years. That's the kind of person she is. Thorough, prepared, always ready for anything. Except for what we encountered out there. The morning we left Portland, Tyler couldn't stop talking about the wildlife we might see. Bears, elk, maybe even a mountain lion if we were lucky. Or unlucky, as Jenny kept reminding him. Emma sat in the back seat with her earbuds in, but I caught her smiling when Tyler listed off animal facts he'd memorized from nature documentaries. The drive took us 6 hours, winding through increasingly dense forest as we left civilization behind. Our campsite sat deep in the Hoh rainforest section of the park, the kind of place where cell service disappears completely, where the trees grow so thick and tall that even midday feels like twilight. The ranger at the entrance had given us the usual warnings about food storage and wildlife, but something in his expression seemed different when he looked at our reservation paperwork. Campsite 47, he said slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. That's pretty far into the interior. You folks experienced campers? Jenny showed him our list of previous trips. Weekend excursions mostly, nothing this remote, but enough to prove we weren't complete amateurs. The ranger nodded but didn't look convinced. Just remember, he said as he handed back our permits, if anything seems unusual out there, trust your instincts. Don't try to investigate strange noises at night, and keep your family close. Tyler thought it was the coolest warning ever. Emma rolled her eyes. Jenny and I exchanged a glance that said we'd be extra careful with the food storage. Looking back now, I realized the ranger was trying to tell us something without actually saying it. Park employees, I've learned since, aren't allowed to discuss certain types of incidents. Insurance liability, public panic, tourism concerns. There are a dozen reasons why they keep quiet about what really happens in those woods. The drive to our campsite took another hour on increasingly rough roads. First paved, then gravel, then barely more than 2 ruts through the undergrowth. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping against our SUV like fingers trying to hold us back. Tyler had gone quiet, his face pressed against the window, watching the forest grow darker and more primitive with each mile. When we finally reached campsite 47, even Jenny seemed subdued. The clearing was smaller than the photos suggested, barely large enough for our 2 tents and the required 30 feet between our cooking area and sleeping area. Massive Douglas firs surrounded us, their trunks so wide that all 4 of us holding hands couldn't wrap around them. The ground was soft with centuries of decomposed needles muffling our footsteps in an unnatural way. It's perfect, Jenny declared, but her voice carried a forced cheerfulness that our kids didn't pick up on. She immediately started organizing our setup while I unloaded gear. Emma helped without being asked, which should have been my first warning that something felt off. Even she sensed the strange atmosphere of this place. We spent that first afternoon doing normal camping things. Tyler gathered kindling under my supervision. Emma found a fallen log that made a perfect bench near the fire ring. Jenny organized our food supplies in the bear-proof container, checking 3 times that it sealed properly. By evening, we'd created a cozy little temporary home in the wilderness. The weirdness started during dinner. We were sitting around the fire, eating Jenny's famous camping chili when Tyler suddenly stopped mid-bite. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. We all froze, listening. At first, just the normal forest sounds. Wind through branches, the distant call of an owl, the pop and crackle of our fire. Then I heard it too. A rhythmic knocking sound like someone hitting a tree with a baseball bat. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. "Woodpecker," Jenny said quickly. "Just a woodpecker working late." But woodpeckers don't work after dark, and this sound had a deliberate quality to it, almost like communication. The knocks came from our left, maybe 50 yards into the forest. Then, after a long silence, an answering series of knocks from our right, roughly the same distance. Emma pulled her legs up onto the log, wrapping her arms around her knees. "That's not a bird," she said quietly. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it started. We sat in tense silence for several minutes, but heard nothing more unusual. Jenny suggested we play cards to lighten the mood, and we spent the next hour teaching Tyler to play hearts, while carefully not mentioning the sounds we'd heard. By 9 o'clock, exhaustion from the long drive and setup had us all yawning. We secured the campsite, double-checking that every scrap of food was locked away, and retreated to our tents. Jenny and I shared one while the kids took the other, positioned just 10 feet away. I fell asleep listening to the ordinary sounds of the forest, convincing myself that the knocking had been completely natural. Some territorial dispute between animals, or branches hitting each other in the wind. Rational explanations for everything. The scream that woke me at 2 in the morning was anything but rational. It started low, almost like a woman crying, then rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the trees, filling the clearing with an overwhelming sense of wrongness. Jenny grabbed my arm so hard she left bruises I'd find later. "David," she breathed. "What was that?" Before I could answer, Tyler's terrified voice came from the other tent. "Mom? Dad? We're here, buddy. Stay in your tent. It's just an animal." But I didn't believe my own words. No animal I knew of made sounds like that. It had an almost human quality, but wrong in every way. Like someone had taken a human voice and stretched it beyond its natural limits. The scream came again, closer this time, maybe 30 yards from our tents. I could hear something large moving through the underbrush, not trying to be quiet. Branches snapped, bushes rustled. Whatever it was big and it was circling our campsite. I reached for the flashlight, but Jenny stopped me. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't let it know we're awake." So we lay there in the dark, barely breathing as something massive prowled around our camp. I could hear its breathing now, deep and rhythmic with a strange whistling quality. It stopped near the fire ring where our coals still glowed faintly. Through the thin tent wall, I saw a shadow pass in front of the dying fire, a shadow that stood upright and must have been 8 feet tall. Emma's muffled sob came from the other tent. The shadow froze, turning toward the sound. For a horrible moment, I thought it would approach their tent. My hand found the bear spray in our emergency kit, though I had no idea if it would work on whatever stood outside. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the thing left. I heard it moving away through the forest, each footfall a heavy thud that vibrated through the ground. We waited another hour before anyone dared speak above a whisper. "We're leaving at first light," Jenny said, and I didn't argue. None of us slept for the rest of the night. We lay in our sleeping bags, fully dressed, listening to every sound. Twice more we heard the knocking sounds, now from different directions, as if multiple creatures were communicating around us. Once, just before dawn, something ran past our campsite at incredible speed, close enough that I felt the ground shake. As soon as the sky began to lighten, we started packing. Nobody spoke about what had happened. We worked with the efficiency of people who knew they needed to leave but were trying not to panic. Tyler helped without being asked, rolling sleeping bags and stuffing them into compression sacks. Emma collapsed the tents while Jenny and I loaded the vehicle. That's when I found the footprints. They circled our entire campsite, pressed deep into the soft earth. Each print was at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide with 5 distinct toes. The stride length suggested something walking upright with legs far longer than any humans. The prints led from the forest to our fire ring, where it had stood watching us, then to each tent, where smaller scuff marks suggested it had leaned down, listening or smelling. "Dad," Tyler said behind me, his voice strange. "Look at this." He stood by a tree at the edge of our campsite, pointing up. About 9 feet off the ground, fresh claw marks scored the bark. 5 parallel gouges, each nearly an inch deep, as if something had gripped the tree while watching us. Above the claw marks, a tuft of reddish-brown hair caught on the rough bark waved in the morning breeze. I pulled Tyler away from the tree and herded him toward the car. Jenny had seen the prints too. Her face was pale, but she kept it together for the kids. We finished packing in record time, threw everything in the SUV without our usual careful organization, and started to leave. The engine wouldn't turn over. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. The battery was fine. All the electronics worked, but the engine simply wouldn't start. Jenny's eyes met mine over the center console, and I saw my own fear reflected there. "Pop the hood," she said, surprising me. Jenny had grown up helping her father restore cars. If anyone could diagnose the problem quickly, it would be her. I stayed with the kids while she examined the engine. After a minute, she called me over. Several wires had been pulled loose, not chewed by animals, not corroded or broken, but deliberately pulled free from their connections. Something with enough intelligence to disable our vehicle had wanted us to stay. Jenny's hands shook as she reconnected the wires. We both kept glancing at the forest, expecting to see something watching us. The woods were unnaturally quiet now. No birds, no insects, even the wind had stilled. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. She finished the repairs and nodded. I rushed back to the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. But as I put the car in reverse, Tyler screamed, "It's back! It's right there!" At the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a massive cedar, something watched us. Even now, months later, I struggle to describe what I saw. It was covered in reddish-brown fur, matted and dirty in places. The face was almost human but wrong, with a heavy brow ridge and a jaw that protruded too far. But the eyes, those eyes showed intelligence. Not animal cunning, but real, thoughtful intelligence. It stood there, one massive hand resting on the tree trunk, and watched us with an expression I can only describe as curious. No aggression, no threat display, just observation, like a scientist studying specimens. Emma took a photo with her phone, or tried to. Later, when we looked, the image was completely black, though photos taken minutes before were fine. I reversed slowly, not wanting to trigger any predatory instinct by moving too fast. The creature didn't follow, just watched until the trees blocked our view. We drove in tense silence down the rough road, expecting at any moment to find our path blocked or to see something racing through the trees alongside us. Nothing happened. We made it to the main road, then to the ranger station, where I fully intended to report what we'd seen. But the ranger who checked us in wasn't there. The younger woman at the desk listened to our story with polite skepticism until I showed her the photos on my phone of the footprints and claw marks. Her expression changed immediately. "Delete those," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "What? Why?" "Just delete them, please, And don't camp in the interior sections anymore. Stick to the designated campgrounds near the main roads. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. And don't talk about this, not to anyone. It's for your own safety. I wanted to argue, to demand explanations, but Jenny touched my arm. She was right. We needed to leave, to get our kids away from this place. I deleted the photos while the ranger watched, though I'd already sent copies to my cloud storage. We drove straight home to Portland, 8 hours of tense silence broken only by Tyler asking questions we couldn't answer. Emma stayed quiet, staring out the window, occasionally checking her phone as if hoping the black photo would suddenly reveal what she'd tried to capture. That night, safe in our own home, doors locked and lights on, we finally talked about what had happened. Tyler was convinced we'd encountered Bigfoot. Emma thought it was some undiscovered primate species. Jenny, ever practical, suggested it could have been a person in an elaborate costume, though she couldn't explain the footprints or how anyone could have moved so quickly through dense forest in the dark. I didn't share my theory. Couldn't really, because it sounded insane even to me. But those eyes, that intelligence, the deliberate disabling of our vehicle, it all suggested something that understood us far better than we understood it. Something that had watched us, evaluated us, and decided to let us leave. The next few weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt forced. We didn't talk about the camping trip unless one of the kids brought it up. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the dreams that came when I tried to sleep. Dreams of being watched from the forest's edge, of something calling my name in a voice that wasn't quite human. Tyler became obsessed with Bigfoot research. He spent hours online reading encounter reports, watching grainy videos, comparing footprint casts. He showed me dozens of stories that matched elements of our experience. The wood knocking, the screams, the intelligent behavior. According to his research, we'd experienced a classic territorial display, meant to drive us away from an active habitat area. Emma took a different approach. She contacted wildlife biologists, primatologists, anyone with credentials who might offer a scientific explanation. Most didn't respond. The few who did suggested misidentification of known animals, mass hallucination, or hoaxes. One professor from the University of Washington, though, sent a strange reply. "Some questions are better left unasked," he wrote. "Some answers are better left unknown. Be grateful for your safe return and move forward with your lives." Jenny handled it by not handling it. She threw out all our camping gear, claiming it was damaged and needed replacement. She removed the Pacific Northwest from our list of vacation destinations. She started having nightmares too, though she tried to hide them. I'd wake to find her sitting by the window, staring out at our backyard as if expecting to see something staring back. 3 months after our encounter, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a flash drive containing a single video file. The footage was grainy, clearly from a trail camera, dated 2 days after our camping trip. It showed our abandoned campsite from an angle that suggested the camera was mounted high in a tree. In the video, 3 figures entered the clearing. They were massive, covered in fur, walking upright with a strange, fluid grace. One examined the fire ring where we'd cooked. Another inspected the spots where our tents had been, seeming to smell the ground. The third, the largest, stood in the center of the clearing and made a low, rumbling sound that the camera's microphone barely captured. Then it looked directly at the camera. Not a glance, not accidental, but a deliberate, knowing look. It reached up, the video shook, and the file ended. I've watched that video 100 times. Shown it to Jenny, though she wishes I hadn't. The kids don't know about it. I've considered sending it to news outlets, posting it online, sharing it with researchers, but I always remember the ranger's warning and the professor's cryptic response. Some things I've come to believe exist in the margins of our world for a reason. They thrive in the spaces we don't look, in the forests we don't explore, in the darkness we instinctively avoid. Our encounter was a warning, maybe even a kindness. We were allowed to leave with nothing more than fear and questions. Others haven't been so lucky. I've done research of my own since then. Not Tyler's enthusiastic Bigfoot hunting or Emma's scientific inquiries, but something darker. I've looked into missing person reports from national parks, particularly the Pacific Northwest. The numbers are staggering. Many are found, some alive, some not. But a significant percentage simply vanish. No body, no equipment, no trace except occasionally footprints that don't match any known animal. There's a pattern to some of these disappearances. They occur in clusters, specific areas that seem to have higher incident rates. Campsite 47 sits in the middle of one of these clusters. The ranger knew. That's why he warned us as much as he could without violating whatever policy keeps them silent. I've also found other encounter reports buried in obscure forums and whispered in online communities devoted to unexplained phenomena. Stories that match ours in disturbing detail. The wood knocking as communication, the systematic investigation of campsites, the disabling of vehicles. But most disturbing are the reports of people who didn't leave when warned, who pushed deeper into territories they weren't meant to enter. Those stories don't end well. One account, posted by a search and rescue volunteer who quit after 20 years, describes finding a campsite where everything was intact except for the people. Tents standing, food stored properly, vehicles operational, but the family of 5 simply gone. The only evidence was footprints, both human and something else, leading into the forest and not returning. The official report blamed bears, but the volunteer knew better. Bears don't leave 18-inch footprints. Bears don't arrange torn clothing in neat piles. Bears don't take only the people while leaving valuable equipment untouched. Another story from a former park ranger tells of areas that get temporarily closed for trail maintenance or ecological restoration. During these closures, teams in unmarked vehicles arrive. Areas get surveyed with equipment the ranger didn't recognize, and occasionally something gets transported out in heavily reinforced containers. The ranger was transferred after asking too many questions, but not before seeing one of those containers rock violently from within. Something inside pounding against the walls with enough force to dent steel. These stories led me to a researcher, Dr. Patricia Hayes, who spent 30 years studying what she carefully calls undocumented primate populations in North America. She agreed to speak with me only after I sent her the video from the trail camera. We met in a crowded coffee shop in Seattle where the noise would mask our conversation. "Your family is lucky," she said without preamble. "You encountered what I call a Type 2 interaction, observation and warning but no direct contact. Type 1 is mere evidence like footprints or sounds. Type 3, well, Type 3 interactions are why I no longer do field research." She explained that these creatures, whatever they are, have a complex social structure and clear territorial boundaries. They're intelligent enough to recognize threats and curious enough to investigate intruders. Most importantly, they seem to understand that their survival depends on remaining hidden from the wider world. "They've watched us for centuries," she said, her voice barely audible over the coffee shop din. "Learned our patterns, our technologies, our weaknesses. They know exactly how to remain just beyond proof, just outside scientific acceptance. The footprints that disappear before experts arrive. The vocalizations that recording equipment mysteriously fails to capture. The sightings that happen only to people whose credibility can be questioned." I asked her why they let some people see them, why they revealed themselves to families like mine. "Warnings," she said simply. "They're showing you exactly enough to ensure you never come back. It's actually a form of mercy. The ones who don't get warnings, who stumble into nursery areas or feeding grounds without announcement, those are the ones who become statistics. She told me about her own Type 3 encounter, though the details were sparse. Her research team had been tracking footprints for weeks, getting closer to what they believed was a family group. They'd set up camera traps, audio equipment, even pheromone collectors. One night, their camp was approached by multiple individuals, not aggressively but with clear intent. They dismantled every piece of our equipment, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. Methodically, carefully, like they understood exactly what each device did. Then they stood at the edge of our camp just watching. 6 of them, including juveniles. We were completely surrounded, completely helpless, and they wanted us to know it. Her team left the next morning and never returned to that research area. 2 of her colleagues quit field research entirely. One still has nightmares. Dr. Hayes herself switched to analyzing existing evidence rather than gathering new data. They're not animals, she insisted. Not in the way we understand animals. They're something else, something that challenges our entire understanding of our place in the natural world. And they want to stay hidden. The smart choice is to let them. I thought about her words for weeks afterward, about the intelligence in those eyes that watched us leave, about the careful examination of our campsite in the trail camera footage, about the deliberate nature of every interaction we'd experienced. 6 months after our camping trip, I made a decision that Jenny still doesn't fully understand. I returned to Olympic National Forest. Not to campsite 47, I'm not that foolish, but to the ranger station. I needed to speak with the ranger who'd checked us in, who'd tried to warn us. I found him just ending his shift. Roger Thompson, according to his name tag, had been a ranger for 15 years. When I introduced myself and mentioned our camping trip, his expression shifted from professional friendliness to guarded concern. "You didn't go back there, did you?" he asked immediately. I assured him I hadn't, that I just needed to understand what had happened. He looked around the empty parking lot, then gestured for me to follow him to a picnic area away from the station. "I can't tell you anything officially," he began, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "But unofficially, you need to understand that some parts of this forest are older than human memory. Things live here that were here before us and will be here after we're gone. We manage the parts we can, the safe parts, the parts that fit into neat categories of flora and fauna. But the deep places, the old growth sections, those belong to something else." He told me about patterns he'd observed over his career, campsites that experienced repeated incidents, trails that seasoned hikers suddenly refused to use, areas where the wildlife behaved differently, where birds didn't sing and deer didn't graze. Campsite 47 shouldn't even be on the reservation system, he admitted. It gets pulled every few years after an incident, then somehow gets added back by someone higher up the chain, like someone wants to see what happens when people camp there. This revelation chilled me more than any creature encounter. The idea that someone, some agency or organization was deliberately placing families in danger as some kind of experiment or observation study was almost too horrible to consider. Roger must have seen my expression because he quickly added, "Or maybe it's just bureaucratic incompetence. Systems not talking to each other. The right hand not knowing what the left is doing. That's probably all it is." But his tone suggested he didn't believe that any more than I did. He gave me one last piece of advice before we parted. "If you ever hear wood knocking in sets of 3, leave immediately. Don't pack, don't investigate, just leave. 3 knocks means you're in active territory. 5 knocks means you've been marked for observation. 7 knocks, well, if you hear 7 knocks, it's probably already too late." We'd heard 3 knocks. Just 3. a warning we'd been too ignorant to understand at the time. The drive home from that meeting was surreal. The forest that had seemed mysterious and threatening now felt like it was watching me. Every shadow could hide eyes. Every rustle of leaves could be deliberate movement. I found myself checking the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see something following me. Jenny wasn't happy when I told her about the meeting. She wanted to forget the whole experience, to pretend it had never happened. But I couldn't. The need to understand, to make sense of what we'd encountered, consumed me. It wasn't healthy, I knew that, but trauma doesn't always resolve in healthy ways. Tyler, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity in certain online communities. Without naming specific locations or showing the evidence I'd deleted, he'd shared our story on forums dedicated to cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. Most responses were supportive, sharing similar experiences or offering theories, but some were warnings. One message from an account that was deleted immediately after sending said simply, "Stop talking about it. They use the internet too." Paranoid? Probably. But I made Tyler stop posting about our experience. Emma's research had taken a different turn. She'd become interested in indigenous legends about the forests of the Pacific Northwest. The stories she found were illuminating. Tales of the Stay-Yaha, the Bogsgish, the Siatko. Different names from different tribes, but all describing large, hairy, intelligent beings that lived in the deep forests. Beings that were to be respected, avoided, and never angered. One story particularly stood out. It told of a treaty, ancient beyond memory, between the first humans in the region and the giants of the forest. Humans would stay in the valleys and clearings, the giants would keep to the deep woods, and both would prosper. But as humans spread, building roads and towns deeper into the wilderness, the treaty was strained. The giants retreated further, but there were limits to how far they could go. "What if it's true?" Emma asked one evening. "What if we're the invaders and they're just trying to protect what's left of their territory?" It was a perspective I hadn't considered. We'd felt like victims terrorized by unknown creatures. But from their point of view, we were the threat. Our cars, our cameras, our constant encroachment into spaces that had been theirs for millennia. This shift in perspective led me to a different kind of research. I started looking into conservation efforts, land protection initiatives, proposals to expand wilderness areas. I found an interesting pattern. Areas with high numbers of incidents often became protected lands within a few years. Not publicly, not with fanfare, but quietly. Land purchases by environmental groups that no one had heard of. Federal designations that happened without public comment periods. Spaces removed from human use without explanation. Someone or some organization was systematically protecting these creatures by protecting their habitat. The question was whether this was driven by conservation ethics or by fear of what might happen if these beings had nowhere left to go. A year has passed now since our camping trip. Life has mostly returned to normal. Tyler still researches cryptozoology, but with more academic rigor, planning to study wildlife biology in college. Emma has developed a deep respect for wilderness and indigenous cultures, volunteering with environmental organizations. Jenny has found peace by choosing to interpret our experience as an encounter with an endangered species that deserves protection and distance. And me? I've made my own kind of peace with what happened. I still have the trail camera footage. Sometimes late at night I watch it and wonder about the creatures in it. Where they are now, whether they remember us as clearly as we remember them. I wonder if they have names for us, stories they tell their young about the strange, weak beings who sometimes stumble into their world. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that we were warned rather than harmed. Grateful that my family is safe. Grateful that there are still mysteries in the world, Still places where the unknown thrives beyond our understanding and control. Last month, I received another anonymous package. This time, it contained a single photograph. It showed our abandoned campsite taken from high in a tree. In the foreground, barely visible, was part of a massive hair-covered arm. But what struck me most was the background. There, sitting on the log Emma had used as a bench, was my son's pocket knife. He'd lost it during our frantic packing, a cheap thing, but one he'd been proud of. The knife had been placed deliberately, positioned on the log like a monument or a marker. Like someone or something was saying, "We remember you were here." I showed the photo to Tyler. His eyes went wide, then he smiled. "They kept it," he said softly, "like a souvenir." That's when I realized the truth that had been nagging at me for a year. We weren't the only ones changed by our encounter. Somewhere in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, beings we can barely comprehend remember a family that came into their territory. Maybe they tell stories about us the way we tell stories about them. Maybe they wonder what we are, where we come from, why we keep pushing into their world. Maybe they fear us as much as we fear them. This understanding has changed how I see our experience. We weren't victims of a monster attack. We were participants in a moment of contact between two intelligent species sharing the same planet but living in different worlds. It was terrifying, yes, but also profound. How many people throughout history have stood at that intersection between the known and unknown? The indigenous peoples knew. Their stories and traditions show a deep understanding of coexistence with these beings. They knew where not to go, what sounds to heed, how to show respect for territories not their own. We've lost that knowledge in our modern world, replaced it with the arrogant assumption that every space on Earth belongs to us. But it doesn't. Our encounter proved that. There are places where we're not the apex predator, not the most intelligent being, not in control. Places where we're the outsiders, tolerated at best, warned if we're lucky, and sometimes when we push too far, removed entirely. Dr. Hayes contacted me again last week. She'd heard about the photograph somehow. The network of researchers and experiencers is small and interconnected, sharing information in careful, quiet ways. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in joining a new project she was developing. Not field research, but data analysis. Comparing encounter reports, looking for patterns, trying to understand the boundaries and behaviors of these hidden populations. "We're not trying to prove they exist," she explained. "We're trying to understand the rules of coexistence, where they are, where we shouldn't be, how to prevent dangerous encounters. Think of it as creating a new kind of map, one that shows not just geography, but sovereignty." I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to leave it all behind, to pretend that night in the forest never happened. But another part recognizes the importance of what she's proposing. If these beings exist, and I know they do, then understanding how to share the planet with them is crucial. Not for us to find them, but for us to avoid them. To respect their space the way they mostly respect ours. Jenny thinks I should do it. "Better to be part of the solution," she said, "than to wait for the problem to get worse." She's right, as usual. As humans push deeper into wild spaces, as development encroaches on the last remote areas, encounters will increase. The careful balance that has existed for centuries is breaking down. The question isn't whether these beings will be discovered, but what happens when they are. Will it be through careful research and respectful distance, or through tragedy and conflict? Tyler wants to help with the project. He spent the last year becoming an expert on encounter reports, creating his own database of sightings, sounds, and evidence. His analytical mind has found patterns others missed, times of year when encounters spike, weather conditions that correlate with sightings, geographic features that appear repeatedly in reports. "They migrate," he told me excitedly last week. Not randomly, but in patterns. Following food sources, avoiding human activity, moving between territories on schedules we can predict if we have enough data. Emma's contribution has been different but equally valuable. She's been building relationships with tribal elders, learning the old stories, the traditional knowledge that predates modern encounter reports by centuries. Many are reluctant to share, understandably protective of sacred knowledge. But some see the wisdom in teaching outsiders the rules their ancestors knew. One elder, who asked not to be named, told Emma something that haunts me. "They're waiting," he said. "Waiting to see if humans will remember how to share the earth or if they'll have to reclaim it. They've been patient for generations, but patience isn't infinite. When the last of their safe places disappears, when they have nowhere left to retreat, that's when the real conflict begins." His words remind me of the intelligence I saw in those eyes at the edge of our campsite. Not just animal intelligence, but something deeper. Planning intelligence, strategic intelligence, the kind that disables vehicles and arranges evidence, the kind that can wait generations for the right moment. This is why I'm sharing our story now, despite the warnings to stay quiet, not for fame or to convince skeptics, but as a warning of my own. These beings exist. They're intelligent, they're powerful, and they're running out of room. Every year, more wilderness disappears. Every year, encounters increase. Every year, the buffer between our worlds shrinks. We're approaching a tipping point, a moment when coexistence becomes impossible because there's nowhere left for them to exist. I think about that creature standing at the edge of our campsite, watching us leave. Was it relief in those eyes? Satisfaction that we'd received the message and were departing? Or was it something else? A calculation, perhaps? A measurement of threat versus opportunity? A decision about whether we were worth the risk of exposure? We passed that test, apparently. But what about the next family and the one after that? The kids have grown from our experience in unexpected ways. Tyler's become an advocate for wilderness protection, understanding now that preserving wild spaces isn't just about scenery or recreation. It's about maintaining the boundaries that keep us safe from things we're not meant to encounter. He speaks at schools about conservation, never mentioning our encounter directly, but hinting at the mysteries that make preservation crucial. Emma's taken a different path. She's studying anthropology with a focus on indigenous cultures and their relationship with the natural world. She believes the key to coexistence lies in rediscovering traditional knowledge, in learning to see the forest as the indigenous peoples did, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living community where humans are just one part. "They knew the rules," she says, "we've just forgotten them." Jenny's response has been the most practical. She's become involved in local politics, pushing for stronger protections for wilderness areas. She doesn't talk about Bigfoot or unknown creatures. Instead, she focuses on habitat preservation, wildlife corridors, and limiting human encroachment into sensitive areas. She knows, as I do, that protecting their space protects us too. As for me, I've found my own way to contribute. I've been documenting encounters not for proof or publicity, but for patterns. Working with Dr. Hayes and others, we're creating a database of incidents, looking for the rules that govern these interactions. When do they warn versus when do they attack? What triggers territorial responses? How can humans recognize and respect boundaries we can't see? It's dangerous work in its way, not physically, but intellectually and emotionally. Every story we document is a reminder of how little we understand our world. Every pattern we identify raises more questions than answers. Every rule we think we've found has exceptions that suggest a complexity beyond our current comprehension. But it's necessary work, because the alternative, ignorance and accidental provocation, is far more dangerous. 3 weeks ago, another family had an encounter at campsite 47. Despite Roger's efforts, it had been added back to the reservation system. This family wasn't as lucky as ours. They didn't heed the warnings, didn't leave when the wood knocks started. They tried to document everything, pursuing the sounds with cameras and recorders. They were found 3 days later, alive but changed. They won't talk about what happened during the missing days. The father just rocks back and forth, whispering numbers that might be coordinates. The mother hasn't spoken at all. The children draw pictures of trees with eyes and shadows that stand upright. The campsite's been permanently closed now, officially for environmental restoration. Unofficially, Roger tells me, because whatever patience existed for human intrusion in that area has run out. They're getting less tolerant, he said during our last conversation. More aggressive in their warnings. Like they know something's changing and they're preparing for it. I think about his words often. About what changes might be coming that these beings can sense but we can't. Climate change shifting their food sources. Development finally pushing into their last refuges. Or something else. Something we haven't considered. The trail camera footage I received has become central to my research. I've analyzed every frame, every movement, every detail. But it's the final frame that haunts me most. The creature looking directly at the camera, knowing it was there, understanding what it was. That wasn't coincidence. It was a message. We see you seeing us. It's a warning that goes both ways. They know we're watching, trying to understand them, and they're watching us back, with intelligence we're only beginning to appreciate. The question is what conclusions they're drawing about us. Are we a threat to be eliminated? A nuisance to be avoided? Or something else entirely? Dr. Hayes believes we're at a crucial juncture in human cryptid relations. Yes, she's started using that term, cryptid, hidden animal. It's more respectful than monster, more accurate than unknown. These beings aren't unknown to everyone. The indigenous peoples knew them. Rural communities have coexisted with them for generations. It's only modern urban humanity that's forgotten they exist. We have maybe a decade, she told me recently, before encounters become too frequent to ignore. Before someone captures footage that can't be dismissed. Before the world has to acknowledge that we're not alone at the top of the food chain. When that happens, and she's convinced it will happen, the reaction will determine everything. Will we try to capture them, study them, put them in zoos? Will we see them as threats to be eliminated? Or will we recognize them as fellow intelligent beings deserving of rights and respect? The answer might determine whether we face coexistence or conflict. This is why I'm documenting everything now. Our encounter, the research that followed, the patterns we're discovering. Someone needs to create a record, a guide for what's coming. A manual for coexistence with beings we don't understand but must learn to live alongside. Because they're not going away. If anything, they're becoming more active, more visible, more willing to interact with humans who enter their territory. The old boundaries are breaking down, and new ones need to be established before it's too late. Tyler asked me recently if I regret that camping trip. It's a complicated question. The terror of that night still visits me in dreams. The sound of breathing outside our tent, the shadow by the dying fire, the intelligence in those eyes, these memories can still make my hands shake. But I don't regret it. Because now I know. I know we're not alone in the wilderness. I know there are mysteries our science hasn't explained. I know there are boundaries we need to respect. Most importantly, I know my family was given a gift that night. Not the gift of seeing something extraordinary, though that was part of it. But the gift of warning. The gift of understanding. The gift of survival. We were allowed to leave, permitted to return to our world with nothing more than terror and knowledge. That was an act of mercy from beings that could have done far worse. And for that, despite the nightmares and the questions that will never be answered, I'm grateful. The footprints have long since been washed away by rain. The claw marks on the tree have likely grown over. Campsite 47 sits empty now, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. But somewhere in those woods, beings with intelligence and memory know that a family came, saw, and left with respect. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all the coexistence we need. Mutual awareness, mutual respect, mutual distance. But I keep thinking about the younger ranger's words, about patterns and territories and boundaries we don't understand, about patience that isn't infinite, about changes coming that we can't yet see. The wood knocks have been reported more frequently lately, not just in the Pacific Northwest but across the country. 3 knocks, 5 knocks, sometimes 7. Warnings, observations, and occasionally something worse. Families disappearing, hunters vanishing, hikers found in states of shock that no amount of therapy can cure. The boundaries are being tested, from both sides. Last week I had a dream, not a nightmare this time, but something stranger. I was back at campsite 47, but I wasn't afraid. The creature was there, standing at the edge of the clearing, but it wasn't threatening. It was just watching, waiting. In the dream, I understood what it wanted. Not territory or isolation, but acknowledgement. Recognition that this world belongs to more than just humans. Acceptance that some mysteries should remain mysterious. Agreement that some boundaries should never be crossed. I woke up with an overwhelming urge to return to the forest. Not to campsite 47, never there again, but to the wilderness itself. To stand at the edge of the unknown and acknowledge its right to remain unknown. To pay respects to mysteries that predate human understanding. Jenny thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But I've learned that crazy is a relative term in a world where 8-foot-tall intelligent beings can disable car engines and leave no trace except footprints and fear. Next month, I'm joining Dr. Hayes' research project officially. Not to hunt for proof or seek encounters, but to help establish what she calls protocols of coexistence. Guidelines for humans entering wilderness areas. Recognition signals that show respect for territories. Withdrawal procedures for when warnings are received. It sounds almost military, and maybe it needs to be. Because what we're really talking about is preventing a war between species. A war humans might not win despite our technology and weapons. Because these beings know us better than we know them. They've been watching us for centuries, learning our patterns, our weaknesses, our fears. But they've also shown mercy, repeatedly. Every warning knock, every allowed withdrawal, every family permitted to leave with only stories to tell, these are acts of restraint from beings that could do so much worse. The question is how long that restraint will last. Tyler's research has revealed something disturbing. Encounter reports are clustering around specific dates, not randomly distributed throughout the year, but concentrated in patterns that suggest coordination. As if these beings are communicating across vast distances, organizing responses to human encroachment. They're networked, he said, showing me his data. Like they have their own internet, but made of forest sounds and scent markers and things we don't understand. If he's right, and his data is compelling, then we're not dealing with isolated populations, but with a connected intelligence spanning the continent. Maybe the world. That changes everything. It means every encounter is remembered, shared, added to a collective understanding of human behavior. It means they're learning about us faster than we're learning about them. Emma's research has taken an even more unsettling turn. The indigenous stories she's collected don't just describe these beings. They describe agreements, treaties, consequences for violations. And according to several elders, those agreements are still in effect, even if modern humans have forgotten them. We're treaty breakers, she said simply. Every time we enter certain areas, we're violating agreements our ancestors made. And eventually there will be consequences. The elder who told her this looked sad rather than angry. He said his people have been trying to warn us for generations, but we don't listen. We dismiss their knowledge as mythology, their warnings as superstition. And now, as the last wild places disappear, the bills are coming due. This is the real nightmare. Not the creature at our campsite, not the fear of that night, but the possibility that we've already lost a war we didn't know we were fighting. That every wilderness area developed, every forest clear-cut, every mountain mined has been tallied in a ledger we can't see. And someday, maybe soon, the balance will be demanded. I think about that night at Campsite 47 differently now. Not as a random encounter with an unknown animal, but as a test. A measurement of our response to warning, our respect for boundaries, our ability to coexist. We passed, barely. But how many others have failed? And what happens when the failures outnumber the successes? The photograph of Tyler's knife still sits in my desk drawer. I look at it sometimes, this evidence of memory and intention. They kept it, placed it deliberately, photographed it, sent it to us. Why? As a reminder? A warning? Or something else? Maybe it's an invitation. Not to return, never that, but to remember. To carry the knowledge of their existence and share it carefully, quietly, with those who need to know. To be ambassadors between worlds that must share the same planet but can never truly meet. That's what I'm trying to do with this story. Not to sensationalize or terrify, but to prepare. Because whether we're ready or not, the age of human ignorance about these beings is ending. The encounters are increasing, the evidence is mounting, the boundaries are dissolving. Soon, maybe very soon, the world will have to acknowledge what indigenous peoples have always known, what rural communities whisper about, what families like mine have experienced firsthand. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And the others who share our world are running out of patience with our denials and encroachments. When that day comes, I hope we remember the lessons of Campsite 47. That warnings should be heeded, that boundaries should be respected, that intelligence comes in forms we don't recognize, and that mercy, once extended, might not be offered twice. The sun is setting now as I write these final words. Outside my window, the city sprawls in all directions, a testament to human dominance over nature. But I know, as few do, that this dominance is an illusion. Somewhere out there in the spaces between our lights, in the forests we haven't conquered, in the mountains we haven't mapped, they watch and wait and plan. I don't know what they're planning. I don't know when they'll act. I don't know if coexistence is even possible between species so different yet so similar. But I know this. Our family's vacation nightmare was actually a gift. A glimpse behind the veil. A warning about boundaries. A chance to understand before understanding is forced upon us. We were lucky. We left when warned. We respected what we didn't understand. We kept their secret while sharing our story carefully, quietly, with those who need to know. But luck runs out, patience ends, and someday, probably sooner than we think, humanity will have to reckon with the fact that we've been sharing our planet with something extraordinary, something intelligent, something that has allowed us to believe we're alone when we've never been. That reckoning is coming. The footprints are getting closer to civilization. The wood knocks echo in forests where they've never been heard before. The boundaries are shifting and we're not the ones moving them. This is my warning, passed on as they warned us. Pay attention to the forests. Listen for the knocks. Watch for the signs. And if you ever find 18-inch footprints leading to your tent, if you ever hear that impossible scream in the night, if you ever see eyes watching from the tree line, remember our story. Remember that they're intelligent. Remember that they're territorial. Remember that they can show mercy. But most of all, remember to leave immediately, without question or hesitation. Because the next time, the next family, the next encounter might not end with just a story to tell. It might end with another missing persons report that never gets solved. Another family that vanishes without explanation. Another reminder that we were never meant to go everywhere, see everything, conquer all. Some places belong to them. Some mysteries should stay mysterious. Some warnings should never need to be given twice. Our family learned that lesson at Campsite 47. We carry it with us now, a weight and a gift, a terror and a responsibility. We know what watches from the woods. We know what walks on two legs but isn't human. We know what knocks in the darkness and screams at the moon. And now, for better or worse, so do you. The darkness is falling fully now. Somewhere out there in forests across the continent, they're stirring, checking territories, communicating in ways we don't understand, making plans we can't fathom. I hope those plans include mercy. I hope they include coexistence. I hope they include forgiveness for our trespasses and patience for our ignorance. But hope isn't enough. Action is needed. Recognition, respect, retreat from places we were never meant to go. This is the lesson of our nightmare vacation. Not that monsters exist, but that intelligence takes many forms. Not that we should be afraid, but that we should be respectful. Not that the wilderness is dangerous, but that it belongs to more than just us. Tyler just came into my office. He's been analyzing seismic data from the Pacific Northwest, looking for patterns that might indicate bipedal movement of large creatures. He's found something, clusters of micro-tremors that match no known geological or biological pattern. They're increasing in frequency and moving closer to populated areas. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying that mix of excitement and fear I remember from that night at the campsite. "I think they're migrating. All of them. At once." I look at his data, at the patterns emerging from chaos, at the signs of movement on a scale we've never documented before, and I think about the creature at our campsite, the intelligence in its eyes, the restraint in its actions. Was it a scout, a sentinel, a messenger, or was it something else entirely? A final warning before patience runs out, a last chance to recognize boundaries before they're enforced. A mercy we didn't earn but received anyway. I don't have answers, only questions that multiply with each piece of evidence, each pattern discovered, each story shared. But I know this: our family's nightmare vacation was just the beginning. The real story, the one that will determine the future of two intelligent species sharing one planet, is just starting to unfold, and we're all part of it now. Everyone who's read this, everyone who's heard the warnings, everyone who knows that 18-inch footprints mean more than just an unknown animal. They mean we're not alone. They mean we never were. They mean the time for ignorance is over. The wood knocks are starting again, not in the distant forest this time, but closer. Urban parks, suburban green spaces, the thin strips of wilderness we've left between our developments. They're adapting, moving, claiming new territories as their old ones disappear. Or maybe they're not claiming them. Maybe they're reclaiming them. Either way, the boundaries are changing. The old agreements are breaking down. The separation between our worlds is dissolving. And we need to be ready for what comes next. This is why I've shared our story. Not for entertainment or sensation, but for preparation. Because everyone needs to know the signs. Everyone needs to understand the warnings. Everyone needs to be ready to respect boundaries we're only beginning to perceive. Our family vacation became a nightmare, yes, but it also became an education, a revelation, a responsibility. We've seen what others deny. We've experienced what others dismiss. We've survived what others might not. And now, through this telling, you've been warned too. Remember the 3 knocks. Remember the 18-inch footprints. Remember the intelligence that watches from the forest's edge. Remember that mercy shown once might not be shown again. But most of all, remember that we share this world with something extraordinary. Something that deserves respect, distance, and recognition. Something that has shown remarkable patience with our ignorance and intrusion. That patience is ending. The boundaries are being enforced. The time of denial is over. Welcome to the world we've always lived in but are only now beginning to see. A world where humans aren't alone at the top. A world where intelligence comes in forms we don't recognize. A world where family vacations can become nightmares and nightmares can become revelations. Welcome to the truth, and may you never need to learn it the way we did, in the darkness of a forest clearing with something impossible watching from the shadows, showing mercy we didn't deserve but desperately needed. May your camping trips remain peaceful. May your forests stay silent. May your footprints be the only ones you find. But if they're not, if you hear the knocks, if you see the prints, if you feel the watching eyes, remember our story. Remember our warning. Remember our escape. And leave immediately while you still can. Because out there in the spaces we haven't conquered, in the darkness we haven't illuminated, in the mysteries we haven't solved, they wait. Patient but not infinitely. Peaceful but not passively. Hidden but not helplessly. They wait for us to remember the old agreements. They wait for us to respect the ancient boundaries. They wait for us to acknowledge what we've always suspected but never admitted. We are not alone. We never were. And now, finally, terrifyingly, wonderfully, we know